Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of the New School Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Carswell, joined as always by my co-host, Boone Chu, and we have Frank Perez with us of S-File. He's the CEO over there, and you know our motto here on the show, out with the old, in with the new. I'm really looking forward to this one because Boone, it's not always that Boone reaches out to me and says, hey, Adam, I have a guest that we got to have on. So when he does that, I'm like, all right, buckle up. Here we go. So before we dive into Frank's background a little bit, Boone, could you tell us just a little bit about your relationship with Frank and how you found him and brought him here?
Well, I mean, Frank and I, we work in the same space. So I reached out to him recently and spoke to him. I was really inspired by his story. Obviously, he did his, thing, which is similar to my model, like maybe 10, 20 years ago. So I have a lot to learn from him, obviously, from his experience. And I thought just his life experiences, his journey is going to be very beneficial to our audience.
Well, on that note, Frank, if you could just tell our audience a little bit about your story and your background, and we'll go from there.
Sure. I think what inspired Boone really was when I really started this, which was basically I was a teenager in 1980, getting exposed to computers, basically because I had a natural gift to basically start programming. So I had an Apple IIe, started programming in Pascal, and was immediately approached by individuals looking to try to migrate mainframe-based applications down into these new, basically microcomputers to save in licensing fees. I think we were probably in a recession at that time. That's 1980, kind of going through a recession, a little bit where we are right now. It shows a lot of the same that's happening right now. So people were looking at cost cuts, and specifically family offices that were managing oil and gas. I'm in the Houston area in Texas, and a lot of family offices have oil and gas wells, and they have partnership participations in these oil and gas wells. And the tax burden at that time was extremely high compared to what it is today as well, too. So people were really looking to cut costs as we were going through this recession. And I think that was probably the first time people thought that the end of hydrocarbons was imminent. And as a matter of fact, I wasn't quite yet applying for the universities, but I was thinking about going into petroleum engineering. So that was a natural thing for me to think about doing, but everybody was discouraging. That's not where we're going. So I started getting into computers as it was evolved into the point where I had 2 startups, sold the startups at a very young age, and then basically never looked back, and I got the bug to basically do startups. So anyway, that's their common thing.
I love that. There's a billion questions already running through my head that I want to talk to you about that don't have to do with I think the main reason why we have you here today. So we'll follow up offline, but that's exciting. Main reason we're here today, and I'm not sure how much Boone updated you, but like this show is really to help reframe how education has been done traditionally. I don't know how much you know about curiositylab.ai, or maybe I'm even saying too much here. Boone, do you want to kind of take the lead on Frank's first question?
Sure. Frank, I want to know, so I think I kind of asked you this the first time around, but I want to know, like, in terms of sort of your journey, right? Like education, obviously you've been through all of that. And you also have done something unusual, which is that you started, 2 companies, you sold them at a very early age. What is your view on education? And just, like your view right now, like if you have someone kind of like a young Frank going through that same journey again, what would you have done differently this time?
I have a very interesting view. I think education is very important. I think formal education and informal education are both very important. But more importantly, I think teaching young people how to learn, which is that's the most important aspect, because you'll have a life of always learning and always adjusting to whatever new is coming around, especially in spaces where you're dealing with technology like I am in engineering. There's so much advancements that are occurring that if you don't have that natural skill of learning and absorbing knowledge quickly and consistently, I think that you lose out on these opportunities to be a participant in all these transformations that are occurring. So I don't see much different. I think it was really interesting. When I went into the university, I went to the University of Houston. It was part of an interesting program where I was actually taken aside and said, we're going to see if you can teach yourself how to program as one of our classes. And so it was an experimental one where they basically gave me access to the latest Apple and basically said, can you learn and teach yourself Pascal? And so I went through this whole program and taught myself how to do it. I, of course, had the professors and the aides to help me if I got stuck, but I actually opened up a book and learned it from scratch out of guides. And that was 1983, to think about that, when that was happening. So it's interesting in a sense because that taught me how to focus on myself, how to find the resources necessary to basically help me understand the things that I haven't understand, mentors in a sense, and then self-start yourself. And I think this is something that we have to teach young people is how to do that, not to spoon feed them, but to let them learn how to basically explore a space on their own, how to absorb knowledge, and how to be curious about it too. I think the curiosity aspect of these things and to challenge what you're thinking is about is a very important part of learning.
Yes, agreed. And do you see, like, because when I look at education, maybe even in the past or right now, especially, like a lot of people when they go to school and learn, they're only there a lot of times only to get a piece of paper or it's really the only path right now, in my opinion, for a lot of traditional education is to prepare you for college. And in terms of college, it's really preparing to get a job. Did you, like, when you went through education yourself, especially at a young age where you started your own company, did you feel like now that I've achieved in financial independence so early that it sort of took the practical value of education away kind of thing? Or did it, so I'm trying to understand from your standpoint, did the company thing make any change or any sort of shift in your perspective on at least the form of education you were receiving at that time?
It absolutely challenged it, for sure. I was in school to go get a degree so I can make more money. But before I even finished engineering school, I already had made a lot of money. So it challenged my thinking about whether or not I really need to be in school, especially in that 5th year of engineering school, which was pretty tough. And I was dual majoring in economics and engineering at the time. So, and trying to exit my second business, which took another year after that to basically close that deal. Did it challenge it? I think it did. It questioned whether or not we need it or not. And I think that that's a unique question for every individual, in my opinion. I think that the value of a degree has been diminished. I find myself really difficult to hire people who have undergraduate degrees and they don't seem to have qualifications to even feel like they're high school graduates, to be honest with you, from my generation. It's a real problem for educational system today. Most cases now, especially in the AI space and engineering space that I work in, I tend to not even look at individuals unless they have advanced degrees to begin with. And sitting on the board of the University of Houston Computer Science Department, we see a real challenge in the United States because most of the people with advanced degrees in our programs are all foreigners. We don't find any US born, students that are basically looking to get advanced degrees. People want to come in, get a degree and expect to make $100,000, just because they have a piece of paper in that regard. And so we do have that challenge, but I think we're also, we're going to and adjusting that again right now. I'm seeing that happening where people are realizing the diminished value of a degree is really a reality out there. And we have this huge amount of debt that students are really basically in. I think that we ourselves as a society have to look at this and ask ourselves, what's really not working and what's really working and really adjust. And I think thinking about how we look at education and what you're doing, I think is an important aspect for our youth. I have a 16-year-old. He will be entering the college within less than 2 years. And these type of challenges that he has as well too, I think are going to be something that I have a real keen interest in as well, about how you educate yourself and where you go and what kind of degree you're going to get and why are you going to get these degrees. That being said, I do believe that there's a lot of skills that don't require a college education, and that we have to really think about whether or not you're going to get a value from a college education or not. And that's not to say that even going to learn things, I tell young people all the time, even if you want to study history or study political science, it's important that you just want to go learn those subjects, because it gives you two things as well from a future employer. It tells you you can start something, accomplish it. But more important, we're looking to see if you can actually go in and actually motivate yourself to accomplish something and to master something in such a way that we could feel that you can do the same thing and apply those same kind of skills in the job and roles that we want to put you in as well too. So all of these are important, but we have to be cautious as employers that we're just not finding somebody who basically rubber stamped it, got the degree, and really doesn't have a good education or even the basic skill sets to provide any kind of value to us as an employer now.
One thing I gotta mention, and I think it'll make you chuckle a little bit here, Frank, but you mentioned 1983 and still being in school. And I know my dad was still in school in 1983 as well. So I'm like, man, Frank has aged really well, Boone, because I thought he was closer to our age. So there you go. for what it's worth. There's that.
Yeah, well, I my next birthday I'll be the big 60. So yeah.
Love it. But you said something, you just said a lot of valuable things there, but one is just kind of the devaluation of a degree. And it's crazy how, I mean, you just look at the spectrum of people who are graduating with debt, can't do anything, etc. We just want to reinvent so many things with curiositylab.ai that we can. And so I want to step into the world of manifestation, Boone, here. I would say, hey, what if we created a Frank Perez certificate? And what I mean by that is, you're hiring for your companies now. What are you looking for in a new hire? Because obviously a lot of college graduates aren't making that cut. So what's something that Frank would want to see in a young, hungry person as far as skill set? Let's just make it up. What would that look like? What would the Frank Perez certificate look like?
I'm looking for people who are self-starters, who've gone out and taught themselves beyond the degree. I hire a lot of people who have Python skills, but people don't go formally learn Python. When I went to engineering school, I didn't formally learn how to write code. We had to know how to code or learn it on our own to go basically now apply that to build models. And so we weren't taught that at all. You could go take a class and you could go learn it, but you're going to fall behind. The idea here was that you need to go, learn these skills to apply them. They were there to teach you how to apply these skills, not necessarily how to teach you these skills. And that's what I'd look for as well, too, for people basically who can go and learn new skills, constantly get curious about these things, and then look for ways that they can apply these skills, be productive in that way. That's the one thing I would teach people really how to go do on their own. And so the formal classroom is really an exercise of saying, here's a challenge, here are the tools I want to use, let's see how you solve that problem. And then let's see if you can actually get to the very end of this challenge. And through that process, there's a learning process of learning many different things. Learn the problem itself. You might have to learn maybe some background about the problem. You have to do your research. You have to basically fortify yourself with appropriate tools and learn those things too. And then you put it all together and hopefully you get to a point where you can see whether or not you can solve that problem or not solve that problem. But that journey is really what we're trying to get you through now.
Python is an interesting one there, and I feel like a trend we've seen maybe at least I've seen over the past decade is learning these different languages. Do you feel like that's probably one of the stronger ones that just even anyone tuned in right now could go and learn to become hireable? Is Python number one, or what others would you recommend?
Python is good only because there's so much resources for it. You have to think about that. Popular languages means that there's a lot of resources on the web for you to go find out and do things and experiment with. Code, you learn by examples. People have to learn that you can download examples and learn through looking at example code and things like that. Python is wonderful, but from an engineering perspective, of course, who writes in C sometimes and stuff like that, we also go back and say, okay, if you really want to do a mathematical computation efficiently across a massively parallel framework, you need to go down to something like C and the modern version of that, which is Rust. There's a lot of different ones. If I'm dealing with computational scientists, for instance, we might want to go and do something exotic in Julia, but that's not quite as popular. You don't find many people who know how to do these things. And ultimately, when you really start challenging these students, it really isn't about what language you use. It's about whether or not you can actually basically build logic and understand the complexities of logic and interaction things. Can you deal with multi-threading? How do you deal with memory management? Are you concerned about these things? You got to be really efficient. Design and build at the same time is one of the things I like to teach. Why are we prototyping when we can actually design and build it the first time if we can actually conceptualize the full plan of what we're going to do? Those are very important aspects because from a perspective of competing in a marketplace, you've got to get from ideation to prototyping to delivering production ready stuff as fast as possible, because what I've always teach students as well too, or people who I mentor, is if you're inspired with a great idea, and I believe in God, and I say this thing as well too. It says, God puts an idea in my head. He put it into 1,000 other people's head. And what you don't know is you're racing against those 1,000 other people blindly, not knowing where they're at to try to get your idea to the marketplace. That's the world that we live in. And that's the reality of it. And if you're not prepared for that, you're not going to win that race.
So Frank, one question, this may or may not sound like it's education related, but as you know, financial literacy is not, a very big part of the formal education. Question for you is that you sold two companies really early on. What was like your view on money? Like what was the original view on money? How has it changed? Like, especially for someone that, like if I suddenly become financially independent when I was 18, let's just say, and I don't have sort of a foundation, like I haven't formed a foundation, no view on money. I might be like, I don't know how to deal with it kind of thing. It's just like how some people have issues dealing with fame. So I'd like to know sort of your views on money back then, and also how it has changed over time for you.
Well, I used to think when we were young, and of course this is in the 80s, you used to think $1 million is a lot of money. I don't think that at all. I think that's pocket change half the time these days now. So the view of what the value of money is quite different because it's capital, right? And you need capital to apply and do things, and it's expensive to do these things. I think the interesting thing that I have is I don't have probably an appropriate view of money. It's just a fungible tool in a lot of ways to basically measure capital, measure value, and all these other different things as well too. The idea here is to create value and to basically increase the amount of capital you have. Those are the two things. And if you look at money as a currency or things like that, I think you're looking at it wrong, because I grew up in a period when inflation is what we have over the last few years now. Back in the early 80s, we had the same kind of runaway inflation where I remember as a young man, as a teenager, cutting grass, probably at 14 years old, it cost me $0.25 to fill up a gallon of gas. And by the time I turned 15 years old, it cost $1. And you couldn't really stabilize a business, because how do you know exactly what to charge if you didn't have any stable basis for what it's going to cost you? And so these are the type of things that we really financially need to teach people, is that you got to understand the value of what you're dealing with out there. Money is not just simply dollars and a number in a bank account. It's the way you have to look at applying that capital. How can you grow that capital? How do you measure what you're doing and you're performing correctly or not? These things are very, very important. So that means you've got to really understand a balance sheet. You got to understand cash flow and an income statement. These things are very important, even for the household. You got to know these things, and we always start it that way, right? We start with our checking account, learning exactly how to balance our budget in our own household and how much things cost. And today, the youth are going through the same thing I went through. That's really a constantly dynamically changing factor every single month. And I know that because I love doing grocery shopping myself every day. I like to go to a grocery store to get a temperature of what the prices are for things. What are apples cost on a day versus what they were yesterday? What does an avocado cost? What does a salad cost? What does milk cost? All these things are important to have in your head, because understanding these things helps you understand that there are going to be side effects for that. Your employees are going to need more money. How are you going to deal with all these things? The dynamics of pressure that they have at home that you have to look at and try to get in the mind of people, because you have to understand the stresses they may be going through, which they can't perform as well if they're going through these things. So there's a lot of things you got to think about. And money and capital are ways of us understanding what's happening in our society and how that's affecting us from the economy and all the other aspects of it. Those are things that I learned early on because we were going through such a challenging economic environment of high inflation and things like that back then. My first house I bought, Boone, I paid 17% interest rate on my mortgage. Think about that. Okay. Yeah. We've been living through this beautiful period where we can get less than, 5% or less, depending on your credit. Now, people are starting to go through the kind of interest rates and they can't even think about buying houses anymore. And that's the greatest place to store your value in your money and capital, because the home value will constantly maintain itself across economies as they change. So as we have inflation, they will go up as well too. Simple principles, that we really should teach young people, and they don't want to own things now, which is kind of really interesting to me. Why wouldn't you want to own anything? That's where you really, really maintain or create wealth, in my opinion, is when you really own capital and things like a house or property or things like that.
In my view, like right now, especially with AI, sort of making knowledge so accessible, another notch on top of just the internet, it looks to me that, building character skills is going to be a very important part of, people's educational journey. It's not just acquiring knowledge, but also building character skills. Like for you, your own personal journey, what was that like? Like the character skills itself, how did it come about? Was it more like you're operating just on your innate type of nature, or did you experience changes in the way you not just carry yourself, but like your character skills, your mental toughness and that kind of stuff? Did you notice that in your journey, certain sort of milestones that happened that caused you to change as a person?
And I always tell people too, success is a really double-edged sword. There's the good side of it and there's the bad side of it, because it brings on different challenges as well too when you do have success, and you have to watch and manage these things as well too. First of all, having a great moral foundation is very important for me. to feel like I'm morally right and when I'm doing things. I don't like to believe that I cheated away through it and things like that. I like to believe that I earn things, and I want to make sure that we're earning value and doing and creating things for it. But I think it's a generational thing. I think that's in my generation, we were taught that it was that was what gave you character, was that you go off and do things that are good for society and things like that. Today's generation, it's really different. I mean, they're really bombarded with so many distractions and, these ideas of how easy it could be to make a lot of money, when it's really not. It's all really unreal. It's not true. Everything, I says half the things, 95% of all the things you see on there through TikTok or whatever you're looking at are fake. Trust me, they're fake. Nothing worthwhile is easy unless you're extremely lucky. And that's like the 1 in a billion person that can actually find something that makes it very, very easy. And that happens. And I'm not saying not possible. Anybody could win the lottery, right? But the probability of winning that lottery is very, very, very low. So characters is an important thing for having it. I think you're kind of really are built with it. I think as we basically as a society are trying to understand what is a good moral foundation for ourselves. And we're really challenged about that, because our youth are trying to do things like save the earth and all these great big things. But what I think they lack is an understanding of just the simple aspects of physics, the laws of nature, and how these things really work. And without that, no matter what you can conceive, some things are just impossible. They don't happen with a snap of a finger, yet everybody believes things happen with a snap of a finger. And that's a really, really difficult place that I think our youth are in right now, because the reality is going to hit them with a crash when they realize, oh my gosh, nothing is that easy.
To follow up on that, and also to kind of bring this one down for a landing here, I know you said you have 2 kids, Frank?
One.
Okay, he's 16, I think you said. I know Boone's got one 7 years old, right, Boone?
Yeah. Yes.
And I've got 2 under 2. So it's just a fatherhood, parenthood question. What do you feel is like one lesson you've learned through being a father, and also being able to influence your child to learn something that you really wanted them to learn, but you can't push it too much. So what was your strategy? Because I'm sure you had a moment where you saw, oh, he gets it, he did it. I don't know what I did right, or maybe I do, but he finally gets it. So like, what's one lesson you kind of learned in that realm of inspiring your children to do something you think would be a good choice for them?
Well, I think one of the greatest things that I try to always practice is to let my child find his own talents and to pursue whatever he has and support him in every pursuit that he has. And as they grow up at different stages in their lives, they have different desires, and you see this wonderful interest, and it looks like they have the talent to really pursue that interest. Is really interesting. And then next thing you know, you wake up another day and it's gone. And they're on another thing. And then you got to go back and switch. How many times I went from, going from loving music to wanting to play the piano and then the drums. And then that was no good. He wanted to go off and basically do soccer, and did soccer. And we put him in all these camps. He started competing. And then he said, I don't like soccer. I like basketball and I like studies. The more important thing is find your talent. Right? Pursue your talents, but work at it. I mean, when I say do that, I mean, really work at it. And my son is a competitive basketball player. He's a very, very, very talented basketball player, but he still has to do his studies, and he still has to basically actually do the things that I want him to do, which is to get the foundation of knowledge, reasoning, and all these other things as well too. And I'm really proud of the fact that he himself has these self-initiatives and will go do these things on his own. Teen and becoming a teenager will have a different set of challenges over the next couple of years, especially since he's just got a first girlfriend. So I'm sure we're going to be dealing with other things that comes out, but that's just life with these kids, As long as you got support, you provide the support and give them the foundation they need, and constantly just encourage them to make the right decisions, I think they'll be fine.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Frank, thank you for investing your most valuable resource with us here today, your time. Boone, thank you for bringing on another phenomenal guest. This has been a great episode. Really looking forward to getting it out. So, Frank, what's the number one best way any of our listeners or viewers can follow up and get in touch with you?
Well, they can actually just get me in touch with me through my website at sfile.com. That's the best way to do it. I'm always looking for things. We're an AI company as well too, so I just love sharing the research and the things that we're doing with a lot of others, and looking for people as well too that we can actually collaborate with all the time.
Well, on that note, I'm sure we will definitely be in touch as well, which is why Boone brought you here. So yeah, Boone, thank you again for bringing Frank to our show today.
You're welcome. Thank you for coming.
Awesome.
You're welcome.
All right, everyone. This is the New School Podcast, where we live by one motto: out with the old, in with the new. I'm your host, Adam Carswell, joined by our co-host, Boone Chu, the founder of CuriosityLab.ai, and we were joined by Frank Perez, CEO of S-File, on today's show. Make sure you go check him out. We've got all of the information down below in the show notes, in the description. Drop a like, hit that subscribe button, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Remember, in all you think, say, and do, take it to the next level.